I thought rather than reading a long-winded statement, it would be easier and assist the discussion to just take you through a couple of quick slides on what we're doing at the moment in Ryanair, what we're doing in Ireland, and our concerns about the state of currently our national aviation policy. So with your agreement, yes. There's only about 8 slides and we'll go through it reasonably quickly. So the first slide, quick summary of where Ryanair finds itself at the end of 2022, which is in a strong period of recovery from the existential crisis of COVID, or that COVID visit on our industry. We remain, as we emerge out of COVID, by some considerable distance, the lowest fare, lowest cost EU airline. We are seeing a very strong recovery in traffic this year. We're on track. Our year end is March, but it looks like we'll carry about 168 million passengers. That's up 13% on our pre-COVID traffic. We're happy to report that our customer service metrics are at all-time highs, mainly because of good reliability and excellent onboard service delivered by our crews. We are investing heavily and significantly upgrading our environmental rating. Carbon Disclosure Project now rate Ryanair a B, which is an industry-leading environmental rating for a European airline. We expect that to rise to an A in the next 12 months as we invest heavily in new aircraft that are much more fuel efficient. We're also the #1 EU airline for environmental and social governance. I'm pleased to say after the trauma of COVID, we emerge out of Ryanair, out of COVID with a very strong balance sheet, which has enabled us to make brave decisions about recruiting people during COVID, continue to acquire new aircraft, which allows us uniquely in Europe to grow very significantly over the next 4 or 5 years. And we're very keen that a significant proportion of that growth would be allocated here in Ireland. Next slide.
And maybe, Mr. O'Leary, as you're going through it, you might reference back to your opening statement just to link in this presentation with the opening statement, and then that covers the opening statement itself, which is obviously a document we have to publish.
Great. So where we are this autumn, we're operating from 88 bases, a base is an airport across Europe where we base aircraft, cabin crew, engineers and pilots overnight, live there. We serve 234 airports across 37 countries. The fleet this winter is at 517 aircraft, and that will rise to almost 700 aircraft over the next 5 years. We're operating over 2,500 routes with 3,000 daily flights. And I think what's important in all of this, the next slide, is if you look at the existential trauma of COVID. So prior to COVID, which is March FY20, we carried 149 million passengers. If it hadn't been for COVID, that would have been 150 million. In FY21, that collapsed, and we've never seen a collapse like that before. We've been through the Gulf War, 9/11, Icelandic volcanoes. At worst, our fleet was grounded for 2 or 3 days. We've been grounded for 18 months, as has the whole industry, so we weren't unique. But that's the challenge that faces us, and it's also the challenge that faces Ireland as a transport and tourism destination, which lives on the very peripheral edge of Europe. So we collapsed to 27 million passengers in March 21. We recovered some, or a significant proportion of that, to March 22. 97 million passengers. It would have been more, but for Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February, which collapsed traffic in February, March and into Easter of 2022. But since that, this summer, we have recovered very strongly. In fact, we lead Europe's recovery. We're the only major airline across Europe that has restored all of its pre-COVID capacity and then some. We're on track to grow to 168 million passengers this year. But over the next 4 years, as we set out in our submission, we expect to grow by another 60 million passengers a year. And we want to put up to 25% or 15 million of that additional capacity here in Ireland if the environmental and the costs the environmental policies and cost policies are favourable towards continuing to stimulate growth to and from peripheral EU member states such as Ireland. And that is, I think, where we need to focus Irish aviation policy. That takes me neatly on to current aviation. Our concern about aviation policy is it hasn't been upgraded now since 2019. I know the committee is focusing on it and it is timely and opportune. But it is remarkable that the current government policy hasn't been updated. The last report, and there's a copy of the cover document here, which is the second progress report, which is dated February 2019. And it sets out clearly that Ireland's aviation policy is to enhance Ireland's connectivity by ensuring safe, secure and competitive access responsive to the needs of business, tourism and consumers. And we find it, next slide, really quite shocking that that policy hasn't been updated, particularly given the traumatic and existential crises that Irish aviation has suffered over the last 3 years. The policy hasn't been updated under the current government, which since February 2019, the current government, I think, took power in 2020. It is remarkable that that policy hasn't been updated to take account of the damage caused by COVID to Ireland's connectivity, the Ukraine and the ongoing threat to Irish connectivity and air aviation from the illegal invasion of Ukraine, or the likely impact of the current recession on air travel to and from Ireland. We are concerned that in that vacuum of our absence of an aviation policy, the Dublin Airport monopoly has returned to some of its bad habits. It currently proposes to waste €200 million building a tunnel under a taxiway that is absolutely unnecessary at Dublin Airport, that no airline needs and certainly doesn't serve any customer. We're back to gold plating or wasting expenditure here so they can inflate the regulated charges at the airport. We do need, and I think we would ask this committee respectfully to take account of how Europe's environmental policy is damaging the connectivity of peripheral states. Let me start by saying Ryanair believes all passengers should pay an environmental charge. We do have a damaging impact on the environment. Flying does have a damaging impact on the environment, but those charges must be fair and they should be balanced and fairly distributed across all airline passengers in Europe. Currently, they're not, and I'll show you the detail why. European air traffic system is a shambles, and we saw that last summer. It accounts for about 90% of all of Ryanair's flight delays, and certainly about 20% of our fuel consumption and emissions. The prize of getting some effective reform of European ATC, particularly for a peripheral country like Ireland, would be significant reduction in fuel costs, significant reduction in access prices for consumers, and a significant improvement in our reductions in emissions.
An ATC for people looking in.
Air traffic control, the European air traffic control system. We are concerned that the government, at the recent Sharm el-Sheikh conference, one of the solutions being proposed is to call for even more levies on aviation, which will directly damage the competitiveness and connectivity of Ireland and access cost to Ireland. And we would make the point, and I think it's important, while we accept that aviation must pay its fair share, aviation is not the cause of climate change or global warming. Aviation, if you go to the next slide, accounts for just over 2.8% of Europe's CO2 emissions. Marine transport accounts for over 5%. And yet we never hear people talking when, the Sky News wants to show global warming. It's always an aircraft taking off and you can see the contrails. It's never a ferry putting out of some harbour because you can't see anything warming up. So aviation does have a damaging impact on our environment. Aviation must pay its fair share, but aviation shouldn't be asked to carry an unfair share, and particularly when it is asked to carry an unfair share, peripheral countries such as Ireland get very badly damaged. Next slide. This is a very interesting slide. I'd like to explain it. It is the amount of flights undertaken, or the airline emissions on the left-hand side. It's the airline emissions created by each of the major airline groups across Europe: Lufthansa, British Airways, Air France, Ryanair, KLM, etc. The blue element of the bar is the amount of those emissions that actually where the passengers pay a carbon price or carbon tax. And you will see that Ryanair, and to a lesser extent EasyJet UK in the UK, stand out by having over 80-90% of our passengers pay an environmental, or a carbon price associated, or environmental taxes on their flights. The reason the other airlines don't is because of the extraordinary environmental tax exemptions that are being approved by Brussels, largely at the behest of lobbying from the major legacy airlines. The most polluting flights to and from Europe are long-haul flights. Long-haul flights to Europe account for 54% of Europe's aviation CO2 emissions, 54%, but deliver 6% to the passengers, and they're exempt from any environmental taxation whatsoever. So the richest people, the Americans, the Russians, the Chinese, flying long-haul flights to and from Europe, make no contribution whatsoever. And the legacy airlines have very cleverly lobbied Brussels to also give them an exemption for transfer traffic. So the Dutch, for example, Commissioner Timmermans, who's a great advocate for further environmental taxes on everything, and the Dutch have lots of other alternatives if they want to move to and from Holland. advocates that aviation should pay their environmental taxes. Yet his government have designed an environmental tax system in Holland, which is penal, but it exempts all the transfer traffic at Schiphol, which currently accounts for 84% of KLM's traffic. So only 16% of KLM's traffic is point-to-point traffic at Schiphol. That's all that pays the environmental taxes. Yet they damage competition by saying Ryanair and EasyJet and others who just fly point-to-point, you pay all the taxes. And I think it is fundamental to the competitiveness, particularly of not just Ireland, but the peripheral states, and we've had some success with the other European governments in Portugal, Spain, Italy, Malta, Cyprus, Greece, are beginning to push back on this, because I think they accept the point we're making. It is grossly inequitable that poor Irish passengers or poor price-sensitive passengers travelling to the peripheral countries of Europe pay an inequitable burden of environmental taxes, where the richest people on long-haul flights are the people causing the most environmental damage. Those taking 2 flights to get to their destination instead of 1 are exempt. And this needs to be challenged in we would respectfully call for in Ireland's Ireland's new aviation policy. Next slide. Ireland continues to lead short-haul in Europe. Ryanair is Europe's greenest, cleanest major airline, yet our passengers pay a disproportionate proportion of environmental taxes. There is this myth perpetrated by some on the environmental lobby that aviation doesn't pay tax on fuel. It doesn't, mainly because actually it's flexible, it can pick up tax at different countries, and they've not yet designed a way of taxing fuel. But last year, Ryanair passengers paid 640 million of in 2019 pre-COVID, in environmental taxes, APD, ETS, and all the others. And that's equivalent to an environmental tax of €4.50 per passenger on an average fare of €40. So Ryanair passengers are paying about 12% VAT, if you like, on our ticket prices in environmental taxes. Now, we ask what happens to this money. We'll deal with that as a separate issue. But Europe's most polluting flights, which is long-haul flights and transfer traffic, are entirely exempt. Short-haul peripheral airlines and our passengers pay 100% of Europe's environmental taxes. Ryanair this year, or the next 5 years, is investing $22 billion. That's $22 billion in new aircraft. And these aircraft offer us 4% more seats. It's 197 seats instead of 189. But they burn 16% less fuel, and they reduce our noise emissions by 40%. So people ask me, what are you doing about the environment? We are investing huge quantities of money to buy new technology aircraft that are transformative in terms of reducing fuel consumption and reducing noise emissions. We've also set out the most ambitious environmental targets in Europe. We are committed to trying to get to 12.5% of our fuel being sustainable aviation fuels by 2030. We've already signed up 2 SAF supply deals with Neste in Holland and OMV in Austria. We hope to sign another one with Shell tomorrow at an environmental conference we're hosting in Trinity. And we're committed to being net carbon neutral by 2050. We are very concerned about what is happening to our environmental taxes. Again, Ireland receives approximately €140 million in ETS revenues directly from our passengers, routed through them. Ireland commits that money will be spent on environmental measures and climate reduction, achieving climate reduction targets. And as I've enclosed some correspondence with the Department of Transport, over 70% of this money is being squandered on the school bus fleet, which is neither environmentally friendly nor particularly fuel efficient. What we find remarkable is that it was spent on the school bus fleet during 2 years in 2019 and 2020 when the school bus fleet wasn't even operating. The schools were closed because of COVID. Now, we don't begrudge, we fully accept that children have to get to school, but that should be a Department of Education budget. If the Department of Transport or Irish government is receiving these environmental tax revenues from Ryanair passengers, we would ask that it be spent on environmental measures such as producing or procuring more sustainable aviation fuels at Irish airports, or better still, helping us to subsidise the very significant investments we're making in new technology aircraft. We're also about to spend, we've just committed to spend over $200 million on Scimitar winglets, which will reduce fuel consumption on our aircraft by 1.5% over the next 5 years. And yet, in this market where astonishing volumes of environmental revenues are being squandered on the school bus fleet or on unidentified climate finance projects, the government is now proposing new levies on short-haul passengers that will further damage Ireland and our competitiveness. Next slide. We would like to discuss today with the committee what we believe should be included in a new aviation policy for Ireland. And at the centre of that policy should be an aggressive and imaginative growth plan, not just for Irish aviation, but also for the major airports across Ireland. Central to that plan is recognise that Ireland is a peripheral location in Europe. We either are efficient and low-cost attractive destination, or we will not be able to compete. We will lose capacity and we will lose visitors. 2, we need to drive down access costs in order to increase connectivity and tourism. That means we need lower cost, more efficient airports. We don't necessarily believe that airports should reduce their existing charges, but no money should be spent at an airport unless it allows the airport to offer lower charges for growth traffic. Not just growth traffic from Ryanair, but growth traffic from all the other airlines as well. And if Dublin Airport wants to spend 200 million building a tunnel under a taxiway, off you go, but that shouldn't finish up in the regulated asset base. We're calling out for Dublin Airport to extend the existing Pier D, or in other words, have additional terminal facilities up there, and the 200 million would be far better spent by the airport extending Pier D up where on the north apron where the old hangars are. That's where the new runway is being built, and Dublin Airport would get more revenue from passengers and more retail revenue by extending there. Tunnels do not generate revenue for airports except in a regulated environment. We must have, and Ireland must be at the centre of demanding fair environmental taxes. Everybody in Europe should pay their fair share. Long-haul passengers who account for over 50% of Europe's CO2 emissions should pay their fair share. They're rich enough to be able to pay. The short-haul passengers, particularly those travelling to peripheral countries, shouldn't be carrying all of the burden. And it is indefensible that transfer flights across expensive hub airports are exempt from environmental taxes. If you decide to choose to take 2 flights to get to your destination, you should pay twice the environmental charge that the short-haul direct passenger does. Ireland should be at the centre of calling for EU ATC reform. We have one of Ireland's great exports to Brussels has been Eamon Brennan, who's run Eurocontrol for the last 5 years and has met astonishing success in running Eurocontrol. Sadly, he's stepping down at the end of this year. But he has done much to improve air traffic control systems across Europe, but much more remains to be done. We compete, if you look at the 2 other main aviation economies. In America, they have one air traffic control system across America, and the airlines don't even pay for it. It's paid by national government. Where's the other one? America, I forget the other one. Europe, we have, despite having a single marketplace, we have 47 different air traffic control systems that we have to fly through, zigzagging around all these so they can all get a little piece of the pie. We should be allowed to fly. The technology now exists to allow us to fly straight. We should be allowed to fly straight. We would burn less fuel. We would reduce our impact on the environment, and we would pass on enormous savings to our customers. And it is inexplicable. Europe should be protecting the free movement of people. French, when they go on strike, close down. We have to cancel all of the overflights across France when French air traffic control go on strike. The French government used minimum service legislation to protect local French domestic flights. So the French are all happily flying around the place. But it's the poor Irish, the Spanish, the Italians and the Germans who are taking all of the cancellations, and they think we said, we're sorry, your flight is cancelled because it's a French ATC strike. They think we're telling them lies. The sun is shining out there. It is bizarre that Europe's and the free movement of people across Europe in a single market is allowed to be threatened by the French every time they have these recreational strikes, which they have frequently in the summer.
Very happy. The French are very happy.
That's right. It's not something we reform of European air traffic control would save about 20% of our fuel and would eliminate 90% of flight delays. If you put these measures at the heart of a new aviation policy for Ireland in the next 5 years, we believe that Irish traffic will grow by 50% over the next 5 years. And I'm going to ask Eddie just to take us through those numbers.
We've already, in terms of like Dublin, this year we've had our strongest summer ever, and we do react to lower airport charges, which came in as part of the TRSS scheme. Cork. We flew 3 aircraft out of Cork this year, 3 base aircraft, and we are hopeful that we are fairly advanced on a deal with Cork at the moment to continue that third based aircraft into this summer. I'd be reasonably confident of that. In Shannon, we have now a 3 based aircraft in Shannon all year round. We've got a new hangar facility there with 3 bays. We're creating 200 jobs. Knock as well. We've no based aircraft, but a vital artery to the, particularly for UK regional airports into the west of Ireland. And we're going to do close to 700,000 passengers in there. And Kerry, again, which I was in recently, where we've got direct connections to Germany, Manchester and London, is a fantastic facility and should continue to grow. So that's where we are in terms of 2019, 2022. We would see ourselves growing if we have the type of aviation policy that Michael has outlined there, whereby we have competitive costs. We have to have competitive costs. I mean, I was in the Canary Islands last week with the president of the Canaries, and they have a conference there this week of all of the island economies. And Ireland isn't represented at that because they know what's coming for them in terms of, you have the ridiculous situation where a flight from Amsterdam to Aruba in the Dutch Antilles gets 0 in terms of taxes, but if you want to fly down to the Canary Islands, you'll have a €28 tax. And places like the Canary Islands, which are on the periphery, which, their tourism industry is their Ruhr Valley. That's it. If those people weren't working in tourism, they got to work somewhere else, and they will have a carbon footprint somewhere else. So it is imperative that we have an aviation policy that supports the type of growth that we could put into Ireland, and we could see that connectivity expand substantially. I mean, what we did this summer in Dublin Airport, we now have more short-haul connections. Ryanair has more short-haul connections out of Dublin than Heathrow Airport has short-haul connections throughout Europe. So we will be able to do that. We've got 50 aircraft coming this year, another 50 the year after, and we can grow Irish airports by 50% if it runs hand in hand with those the aviation policy that Ryanair has set out.
And we should just explain, those are total traffic numbers in 2019 at each of the individual airports, so 38 million passengers. We think 50% growth is possible over the next 5 years. We won't deliver all of it, but we will certainly deliver most of it. We believe we can grow our existing traffic at Dublin, Cork, Shannon, Knock and Kerry by 50%. Most of that growth will clearly take place in Dublin, where we have the benefit of a second runway, which, and credit where it's due to the DAA, was fortuitously built during a recession and during COVID. That was the right time to build a second runway. The challenge now, though, and the capacity restriction in Dublin is terminal capacity. So we need another low-cost terminal, a bit like Pier D, that runs to the north side of Pier D. When you go across that big the skyway out to Pier D, you need to build something up to the right there. You could build an equivalent of Pier D there, another 120 million. And none of that needs a tunnel under a taxiway. That will serve us nothing. Cork needs no additional infrastructure, it just needs lower access costs. And to be fair, again, and we should give credit where it's due, the management team at Cork Airport have been quite imaginative in coming up with growth incentives here. Shannon had been terrific since it was separated out from under the DAA. Mary Constantine and her team there have done a remarkable job. And Shannon is difficult. I mean, the biggest threat to traffic growth in Cork and Shannon is Dublin. The motorways, we used to do 3 flights a day from Dublin to Cork on a domestic, and the day they opened, either it was the Fermoy or the Mitchelstown bypass, the traffic went from a 90% load factor to 0. Everybody drives. But we still say so. But Cork is growing strongly with European traffic inbound into Cork in the summer and some charters outbound. Knock and Kerry are doing well-run airports, and we are working with them. But it's very difficult to drive additional growth, significant additional growth into Cork and Kerry because we can't base aircraft there late at night. There isn't a demand for those services. So what we wanted to put here is, here's where we think aviation policy should be for Ireland. We need to set out that policy, we need to put it in writing, and we need to challenge our government and our industry. Fine, if we put in place incentives for growth, if we challenge Europe's lazy environmental taxation so that we're not penalising the peripheral countries, can you increase traffic by 50% over the next 5 years and create another 14,000 jobs? And the answer is yes, we can. And just one concluding slide. Again, and I don't want to make it the centre point of today, I would urge the committee just to investigate what is going on with the Department of the Environment on their ETS revenues. This is their own analysis of where the ETS revenues of 140 million over the last 3 years. The school transport bus air is taking 77% of that money. That is not money being spent on environmental or climate projects. We wrote to the Department of Environment, and what they came back with, and I don't need to tell the people in this room who can read English, but when somebody's not answering a question, they use words like an amount equivalent to 100% of Ireland's ETS revenues has been attributed to emission reduction activities. Now, we know when people are speaking in French, and that is classic French. And we've also then wrote back and said, well, what is the climate finance money being spent on the 32 million, the 28 million, the 30 million? Can't get an answer. Please take our assurances that it is amounts equivalent to this have been attributed to emission reduction activities. We don't begrudge the school bus fleet the money, but it shouldn't come out of monies that Ireland is telling Europe we're going to spend on environmental measures. The aviation industry is challenged. We do need to work to come up with more sustainable supply of sustainable aviation fuels at our airports, and where we're investing heavily in winglets to reduce fuel consumption in new aircraft, we think it's not unreasonable that some of that investment would be supported with some income from these funds. That's it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for...
Thanks.